So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah!
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. The Detroit Lions are hosting their second home game next year versus their second NFC East opponent. The Washington Commanders are coming to Detroit as the Lions look to find their first win of the 2022 NFL season. And today, we're going to be previewing the game. We're going to be taking a look at what both teams did last week versus their respective opponents, look at their strengths and weaknesses so far early in this 2022 season, and at the end, try to compare and contrast to see which team should be the favorite and which team is going to win on Sunday. We're going to compare the roster position by position. We're going to go over strengths, weaknesses, and matchups and everything that you need to know about Washington versus Detroit. So, with that being said, we have a lot to get into today, so let's get right on into taking a look, starting off with the Washington Commanders. Now, Washington did win their game in Week 1 and started the season 1-0 versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Carson Wentz threw for 313 yards in the air with 4 passing touchdowns to 2 interceptions. The running game for Washington wasn't anything incredible, as Antonio Gibson led the team with 14 carries for 58 yards. But their receiving trio did have a very good day, and their receiving trio of course, Scary Terry, Curtis Samuel, as well as Jahan Dotson combined for a really good day through the air. And although neither of them or none of the three actually contributed over 75 receiving yards, all of them had, I believe, at least 50 plus, and they were all efficient in their own ways. Now, taking a look at the defense, the Washington defense blitzed a lot versus Jacksonville last week, and Jacksonville doesn't have the greatest defensive line or doesn't have the greatest offensive line, but Washington blitzed a lot. They did get to the quarterback twice with 2 sacks, both coming from the interior of that defensive pass rush, and did walk away with 1 forced interception off of Trevor Lawrence. Now, taking a look at the Detroit Lions, the Lions did end up losing their game versus Philadelphia last weekend, but this was a very close, very competitive game versus one of the projected top seeds in the NFC playoff race, right? Detroit's offense put up 35 despite the lull in the second quarter. Their pass rush was pretty good, getting a lot of pressure. Jared Goff threw for 215 yards and 2 touchdowns to just 1 interception. DeAndre Swift, of course, had the big day and is currently 3rd in the NFL in rushing yards, having 15 attempts for 144 yards and 1 passing touchdown versus statistically the best run defense from a year ago in Philadelphia. And Jameson Williams currently leads the NFL in rushing touchdowns with 2. The defense didn't play a great game versus Philadelphia, but their pass rush did get pressure on a top-tier offensive line in the league. And although they didn't finish, they finished the game with nearly 20 pressures on Jalen Hurts, and going against a far inferior offensive line, and I'd say a less mobile, less playmaking quarterback in Carson Wentz. I do think the Lions will be able to get home a little bit more this weekend if they do the same things. Blitz the same, if they bring the same amount of guys, they bring the same pressure and scheme from that part of the game plan. I think that they should be able to affect Carson Wentz all day long, and they should be able to get some pass rush. And this week, hopefully, as I said, facing an inferior offensive line, an offensive line that is not nearly as good as Philadelphia's, as well as a quarterback that is not nearly as athletic or as escapable as Jalen Hurts, I think should lead the Detroit Lions to finding some success in the pass rush. Now, the Washington run defense wasn't very good last week, right? Going against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who don't have the greatest offensive line, they allowed not a lot of rushing yards, but they allowed very efficient rushes by the Jacksonville Jaguars. I believe James Robinson led the team with 11 carries and had 60 yards on the ground, while while Travis Etienne only had 4 carries but had over 40 yards, averaging well over 11 yards a carry. Their rush defense wasn't very successful, their rushing defense wasn't very efficient, and just because the Jacksonville Jaguars decided not to run the ball very often doesn't mean that Washington's run defense was very good a week ago. The Lions are, as we saw in week 1, are not going to be afraid to run the ball. They're going to give DeAndre Swift the ball, 12, 15, 17 times in the game. They're going to give Jamal Williams probably 8 to 10, maybe even 12 carries in this game. They might even get Craig Reynolds involved in this game if they need to run the ball and pound the rock. They have 3 running backs that are extremely efficient in the running game, and they are going to use all 3 of them if they have to. And I think if the Lions are going to win this week, the rushing attack is going to be a huge part in doing so, right? Breaking up those big runs like we did last week, having a high yards per carry, having multiple scores in the red zone with a really tough ground attack, and just giving DeAndre Swift the football, I think is the Lions' key to success. Now, taking a look and comparing these rosters, I think that the Lions are a better roster than the Washington football team. Whereas last week we went through and it was like, Philadelphia has quarterback, but Lions have it close receiving, right? Oh, it's close at tight end, but I'll give it to the Lions, and it's close at offensive line, we'll give it to the Eagles, right? It was back and forth. It was, one position's better, but it's close, and then the other team had a different position that was better, but it was close. This week, that isn't really the case. Now, starting off with the quarterback position, this one admittedly is pretty close. I don't know who to give it to. I think on their best days, Carson Wentz is a better quarterback than Jared Goff, but I think if you're talking season long, you're talking consistency, you're talking a full year, you're talking what you're going to get day in and day out, I think I think Jared Goff is the more consistent quarterback. So if it's just one of those days where Carson Wentz decides to go back to his MVP 2017 form, the Lions might be in trouble. But if it's one of those days where the playoffs are on the line and let's say Carson Wentz is the starting quarterback of the Colts facing the worst team in the NFL, the Lions might have a pretty good chance of forcing some turnovers on him, right? It just depends on the day Carson Wentz is going to have, whereas I think Jared Goff is a little bit more consistent at quarterback. The Lions have better running backs. I think Antonio Gibson's good. I think that the Washington running back room is pretty solid. DeAndre Swift is the better running back and will be the best running back in this game. Jamal Williams is a very good power back, a very good short yardage back. The Lions running backs are better. They have a very deep, very well-rounded running back room. Wide receivers, I think this one is close as well, but I will give it to Washington. I think Washington's trio trumps what the Lions wide receivers did on Sunday. Right, you're talking Scary Terry, you're talking Curtis Samuel, you're talking Jahan Dotson versus St. Brown, DJ Chark, and Josh Reynolds. I think on paper, I would take maybe the depth of the Lions receiving core over them, but based off what they did last week, based off of the, just different amount of targets, based off of the efficiency on very limited targets, I will give the receiving credit to the Washington Redskins. I think Terry McLaurin's a top 15, top 20 receiver in the NFL. Jahan Dotson had 2 touchdowns. Curtis Samuel looks to be playing more of a Deebo Samuel role, which I think will be very interesting to see how the defense works to stop that. So I think that the Lions have good receivers, but based off all of the drops last week and based off what the Washington Commanders did last week on offense, I think the wide receiving core for Washington is a danger. And I think if Washington wants to win this game, I think if Washington wants to put up points, they're going to have to continue to lean on that receiving core. Now, tight end goes to the Detroit Lions. There's not many tight ends in the NFL better than TJ Hawkinson, and we do not play the Niners this year. We do not play the Ravens, and we do not play the Chiefs. So you're not going to find very many tight ends better than TJ Hawkinson on the Detroit Lions schedule. You're probably going to hear TJ Hawkinson's the best tight end a lot this season in each individual matchup. Now, offensive line, as we talked about, the Lions' offensive line is a top unit in the NFL. Ragnow is a top 3 center in the NFL. I think you could argue he's number 1. Penei Sewell is a monster, right? Even last week when Logan Stenberg stepped in, he had some false start issues, he had some penalty issues, but even he ended up playing a pretty solid game overall. Jonah Jackson's a Pro Bowler, Taylor Decker's a Pro Bowl level tackle. Like, they are a very good football team. Their offensive line is experiencing quite a bit of injury as of right now, but Frank Ragnow was on the injury list last week and played, right? Taylor Decker was back at practice today. Jonah Jackson has a finger injury, but hopefully was just limited in practice and will return. The line is facing injury concerns, but I think that will all work out by Sunday. I think we will see the 4 major starting linemen play for Detroit. Now going on to the edge rushers, I think the Lions have better edge rushers, especially with Chase Young being out. I think that the Lions have better depth, and I think they have a better player in Aiden Hutchinson than what the Commanders have at edge rusher. I just don't think that the Washington Commanders have a great edge duo, right? I think that the Lions have a deeper. I think Charles Harris and Aiden Hutchinson are just better, and I think that the depth behind them being, of course, Austin Bryant, Julian Okwara are pretty good edge rushers as well, right? 4 to 5 sack guys behind them, but I will give the interior defensive line to Washington, and I do not think that it is close. Washington's interior defensive line is incredibly strong, had 2 sacks a week ago, and they are the strength of the defense, right? That defensive line has been the strength for a while. Without Chase Young, the edge rushers aren't quite as scary, but that interior is still very, very stout and will not give up an inch if they don't have to. Now, are they better than Philadelphia from a week ago? I think that's something that can be argued, and that's something that maybe I would argue against, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the interior of Washington's defensive line is scary, and that will dictate how efficient the Lions are on offense this week. Linebacker, the winner at linebacker here is not a winner at linebacker because neither team has a great linebacking core, but I will give it to Washington because the Lions are just that inexperienced and that unproven at linebacker at this point. I will give the linebacking one to Washington, but again, it's not necessarily something to celebrate about. The secondary, I think that it is a little up in the air because I think both secondaries have some key pieces. I would give it to the Lions just based off how Jeff Okudah and Amani Oruwariye played last week. They didn't really allow any big plays over the top. Yes, Amani gave up a few catches. Jeff Okudah, I think, was targeted 9 times and gave up 2 catches for 17 yards. Right, the only big play through the air came on Will Harris, who I don't think should see the field this week. Right, the pass defense wasn't great, but they didn't allow a touchdown. I think they are a very solid secondary, and I think if they keep improving and getting better, I think that they will be the better secondary in this game. And then special teams, I will give to the Detroit Lions as well. Jack Fox is arguably the best punter in the NFL. Austin Seibert was 100% last week. The special teams unit is always very good in Detroit for whatever reason. So I will give that to Detroit. And I think that Detroit is the better football team. I really think that Lions should win this game. This is the first game in 25 contests that the Detroit Lions are favored to win this game. I don't even know what the last game the Lions were favored in was. It was sometime in the Matt Patricia era, and they probably lost. But at the end of the day, the Lions are the favorite team, and I think they are the better team. Now, do I think this game is going to be a blowout? No. By no means do I think that this is going to be a blowout. By no means do I think that this game is going to be, far and away the Lions are the better football team. It's over by the third quarter. Like, we can go home, we can pack up early and celebrate for Victory Monday. But I do think the Lions are the better team. I think that they are rightfully the favored team. And I think if they play the way they did, I think that if they play the way they did last week, we are going to see the Lions celebrating a 500 record, and we will be celebrating on Victory Monday. So with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below what you think. How do you think the Lions are going to perform this week? How do you think this matchup's going to play out? I'd be very curious what you guys think. With all that being said, though, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, as always, go Lions!